Louisiana Association of Business and Industry to be able to share with us some information about the upcoming constitutional amendments. So without that further ado, Stephen, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Tim and Lisa and little Jessica, for inviting me here today. I love always coming up, visiting North Louisiana, visiting with our members, but also not just sharing what we want to talk about today, but also just hearing on the front lines what's happening economically in the marketplace today. I mean, obviously, these are challenging times. And so while I do want to talk about what we want you to consider amendments today, I also want to take the opportunity to kind of hear what's going on the front lines here in Main Street all across Louisiana. So it's a pleasure to be up here and visit with our friends in North Louisiana. I'm going to start this presentation and talk a little bit about, let's start with kind of how challenging things are right now. I've been going throughout the state visiting with members, and you know, the big thing is that there's just so much uncertainty in all of our lives the last year and a half. Whether you're in a business or whether you're just part of your family or your kid's school or whatever, the stops and starts and where do the rules go and what are supply chains doing and how are the employment markets, it's just so much uncertainty in the last year and a half. And it's just been such a challenge. And so it's easy to start thinking about all the things that are going wrong. And then you see what's going on in DC. And it feels like every other day there's a new, issue or mandate or tax or regulation coming down from Washington, which feels tone deaf to actually try to help what's going on for the issues we see on the ground here. And there's a disconnect. And so it's easy to get frustrated about what's going on here. And so that is kind of the reality we face right now. If you're a business or you're an individual all around Louisiana. But while we can talk about that, and we're glad to answer questions on that afterwards, I want to talk about, there's some good things cooking. And it's easy to overlook them. They can be kind of lost in the brush sometimes or camouflaged. But I think it's important every now and then to kind of look at that kind of sunny side of the street if you can. And so the big one I want to talk about is what's coming up on the ballot November 13th. So it won't be long. There'll be some constitutional amendments on your ballot November 13th. And we are here to talk about specifically Amendment 1 and Amendment 2. And encourage everyone to vote yes on those amendments. And I'll tell you why it's important, especially in this pandemic damaged economy that we're sitting in. So if you look at the Louisiana tax code, and more importantly, look at it through the lens of how do we compete? How do we draw jobs and investment? And I think it's important to remember that analysis, because right now, while it feels like there's some tone deaf policies coming out of DC right now, if you live on the East and West Coast, it's also coming from their state capitals. People, companies, investors are fleeing the East and West Coast. They're looking for a better place to go and move their families and their business. And they're looking in the South because the South's got lower quality of life. They've got workforce. They've got ample opportunity in land and property. They got more reasonable regulations and taxes. So they start kicking the tires in the South. Where should we go? And if you go to Nashville, or if you go to any city in Texas, or if you go to Florida, if you go to North Carolina, you go to Georgia, even if you go to Alabama, you're going to start seeing some of those people pop in there. We're not seeing it here in Louisiana. We got to be honest. We're not seeing that influx from those coasts that other southern states are doing. This is a buy opportunity for southern states. We should be expanding and growing and receiving people fleeing those hostile markets. Instead, they're going to our neighbors. Part of that is from the spreadsheet analysis, our neighbors are winning. Texas doesn't have an income tax. Neither does Florida. Neither does Tennessee. Those are issues that we face. And so we have to be aware of that. So if you look at this chart in front of you right now, our tax rates, we rank, in the bottom 10 on our tax rate. And then the way we collect some of those taxes, specifically sales taxes. If you're a business and you're going to have customers in multiple parishes or multiple jurisdictions, if you look at the way we collect that in Louisiana, it's one of the worst and most complicated and bureaucratic ways to do it. So let's talk about why we can fix that with these ballot initiatives and what the impact of that could be. If you look at our tax code, I mentioned the tax rates and the way we collect it. There's also what I like to call some scarlet letter taxes. There's these taxes that basically just stick out like a sore thumb. No one really likes them. The inventory tax, that's the huge one. The franchise tax is another one. Those are taxes that we don't have. So at some point we have to address the scarlet letter taxes, our income tax rates, and how we collect taxes. And the good news is we can do that now. So I mentioned the comparison. Let's take a look at Texas. What does Texas do in all that stuff? Well, they don't have an income tax. They don't have a franchise tax. They don't have an inventory tax. You look how it compares to us. And so when companies look for a southern state near the Gulf of Mexico, they choose Texas a lot because of these issues. Now, when you talk in Louisiana about a comparison to Texas, what everyone always says is, yeah, they're big. That's not fair. The scale's too big. You can't use that. That's not a fair analysis. They don't buy that. Well, how about little brother? How about the state we always pick on? The state we always say, well, at least we're better than Mississippi. Well, if you look at that analysis, let me tell you something. Mississippi's gaining ground. You know, their tax rates are a whole lot better. Their severance tax is a whole lot better, and they're starting to phase out their franchise tax. And I want to remind you what a franchise tax is. A franchise tax is nothing more than a cover charge to be in the state. It's like you have to pay just to exist here. Doesn't matter whether you make money or lose money. That's not right. And so we don't need a cover charge tax, especially when little brother to the east is starting to phase it out. So we need to be aware as we're battling states in the South for all these jobs and investment, and oh, by the way, to keep the job investment we have right now. Because don't think existing companies here aren't also kicking the tires on our neighbors as well. We've got to realize it's not just a joie de vivre or a culture we can sell. We got to sell spreadsheets too. And until we do, we're going to be losing some of these games. And so Constitutional Amendment number 1 tries to address one of those issues. It's how businesses in Louisiana pay sales taxes. It's not changing your tax rates. It's not raising a tax rate. It's how they pay those taxes. Let me give you an example. If you are a company, let's say you're a big Fortune 500 company, but you have no assets in Louisiana. You sell your product online. Let's say you exist in Manhattan and you sell a ton in Louisiana. Louisiana has a policy to give you an easy way to pay your sales taxes. There's a centralized collector, centralized audit and assessment. It's very easy. Click, click, you're done. We give an easy, fast pass, cruise control way for out-of-state companies that don't exist here to pay their sales taxes. But Louisiana has a second law for existing homegrown businesses here. They don't give them the fast pass. They don't give them the easy way. In Louisiana, if you're a homegrown business, if you're a Main Street small business that's been battling in the pandemic, and you're trying to reach customers in multiple parishes, you have a decentralized system. What does that mean? We have over 55 different sales tax collectors locally here. Each of those different collectors have their own audit teams, their own assessment approaches, their own billing practices. Some bill you if you've made a sale. Some just say, hey, we assume you sold, prove us wrong. So if you're a small business and you've got customers in 10 parishes, you could have 10 different audit firms coming at you at a single time. It is absolutely red tape. It's absolutely expensive. And what it used to be kind of an annoyance that we tolerated coming out of the pandemic economy, no longer acceptable. And so what amendment number 1 will do is give the same rights that we already give in Louisiana to out-of-state companies that don't have a physical presence here. And so that's what this would do. And it would do it in a fair, compromised way. Over the last year, the business community, we've been talking about this approach forever. We've been wanting to do this. But last year, we took a different approach. And when I say we, it wasn't just us at LABI. It was other interest groups. It was some of the legislators here in this region and others. And over the off season, worked with local collectors, state collectors, and the business community, and put together a balanced panel that will be the new collector. So local collectors and business will both, and the state will both be at the same task force making those decisions. It's the right thing to do. It's absolutely a critical vote for small businesses all across Louisiana. And oh, by the way, it just puts us on par with every other state in the country. So I think if every other state can figure this out, well, let me say that's not right. Hawaii also has a decentralized system. But let's be honest, that's because they have, what, 3 or 4 different islands. They're all collecting their own thing. Not really the same potatoes, but we'll be like every other state absent Hawaii at that point. So it's very critical to that point. Amendment number 2. This is dealing with taxes. So another reason when the companies look at Louisiana, do I want to come invest there? I've mentioned the sales tax collection side. We can fix that with Amendment 1. On Amendment 2, another thing they look at is they look at their income tax rates. So if I move to Louisiana, my personal income tax is going to be high of 6%, and my corporate income tax is going to be high of 8%. Well, if they look at other states in the region, they'll see Texas, Tennessee, Florida, they'll see no income tax. It's hard to beat no income tax with rates that high. So we have the highest rates in the South right now. Now, many taxpayers know over the years in Louisiana, in order to make those seem more feasible, we've thrown exemptions and credits at it over the years. So every taxpayer can play the chess game with the exemptions and credits, try to buy it down. Some years it works well, some years it doesn't. Louisiana's gotten accustomed to that. What Amendment 2 would do would improve our economic development rankings, lower the rates, and take taxpayers out of having to play this kind of Jenga game every single year to put their taxes, not knowing on any given year whether you can win or lose. So what it would do, it would eliminate the federal income tax deduction and use those savings to buy down and lower rates. So that 6% tax rate would go down to 4.25. That's pretty easy math to understand. And on the corporate side, those 5 different rates we have up to 8% would be consolidated into 3. It would be lowered. And for the first time ever in Louisiana, we would start to reduce the franchise tax. We would knock that down as well. So all of these amendments, this amendment would do is lower rates, pay for it using the exemption, and begin the process of whittling down those rates. Another important thing this thing will do is after you take that out of the Constitution, what you do is you give the legislature the authority they need to then go in and continually put downward pressure on the income tax and do it with a simple majority vote. So next year, if this is passed, the legislature may come into a session and say, you know what, economy's growing, things are doing well, there's extra money here. We're going to throw it at spending, or we're going to throw it at some program no one can find, or are we going to use that recurring dollars to lower rates? This amendment passes, they can do that with a simple majority vote from now on. Currently, you have to go into that Constitution and get your 2/3 vote to get that done. It's an impossible wall to climb. So this will make it not just easier on day 1 for rates to come down, it'll also make it easier for day 2 and going forward for the legislature to continuously whittle the rates down. Ideally, at some point, we can have the economic growth we need to get those rates closer to what we see in Texas and Florida and Tennessee and start battling in a no income tax environment. So who else is liking this stuff? So if you look at the national folks that rank sales taxes and income taxes, they're all saying, oh my God, this is what we need to do. If you look at all kinds of business groups and good government groups in Louisiana that have been looking for ways to reform the state for years, they're all on board. Cable, PAR, Committee of 100, many of the local chambers all across the state, NFIB, all of these different groups are out there supporting many of these provisions. And so you know that there's a lot of folks that have been looking at this for a long time and say this is the right approach to do. I want to give you one visual on this sales tax collection side. Imagine if you're a small business right now in Louisiana. And remember, maybe 30 years ago as a small business, you could just sell to the people in your community and you could be fine. Well, the internet has changed that dynamic. If you're a small business on Main Street and you want to keep your doors open, you got to find customers online, in other parishes, in neighboring communities. You've got to broaden your customer base if you're going to stay afloat, because you've got loans and mortgages to deal with. So right now, if you're that Louisiana Main Street business, this is what you deal with. Louisiana makes you go to your state for your state sales tax. At the local level, you see the different collectors on the screen right here that can come after you. Each of them have different audit provisions. And look, I'm not trying to demonize the local collectors. They're just applying the laws on the books. But this completely puts an unfair burden on small business to have to go out and hire an army of CPAs and attorneys to comply, or just tiptoe to their mailbacks every day, scared to death that when they pull that little lever down, they're going to find an audit waiting for them that they don't have a good answer for simply because it's too complicated to comply with. Or let's just say they want to go get guidance and get information on how to comply. There's a different board for that. So it's a gauntlet we put small business through today. If this amendment passes, this is what small business faces after it's done. They go to that centralized task force that all of this will be under the same roof. You want to know what you owe. You want to know how to pay. You want to know the timeline. You want to get a challenge, maybe an assessment to make sure that you can get your voice heard. You all go to the one-stop shop. It's the right thing to do for small business. It puts us on par with out-of-state businesses, and it protects the right of local collectors to get all of the dollars and revenue that they need to make their communities work. It's a no-brainer. Now, going into the income tax side, most people will see minor improvement, if any at all. It's pretty much a revenue neutral approach, but everyone will see some minor improvement. You see the different scenarios there. But again, the key part of this is once you change this dynamic, the legislature and administration can always go in and look for ways to lower that with some majority vote. And the amendment also will put a new hard ceiling on where rates can go. So remember, right now, the income tax rate, the high is 6%. If this amendment passes, it'll put a hard cap of 4.75. So if nothing else, you know for sure, written in granite, that income tax rates will be lower at least by 1.25, and they'll never have to worry about that again going up. So that gives everyone the security blanket that we all need to make sure that this gun can't be turned around in the wrong direction on that. And I want to give you one other example of why this makes sense on the income tax side. Remember the Trump tax cuts a couple of years ago? It brought in a new level of growth and investment in America. And there are a lot of companies and families all across the country who benefited from that, put more money in their pocket. And we saw consumer spending come up. We saw small business benefit. We saw that ripple throughout our economy. Well, there was one state that the taxpayers did not get the full benefit of that tax cut, and that's Louisiana. Because when we had that federal tax cut, that meant taxpayers here, that was a little less that they could deduct from their state taxes here. So some of that benefit for Louisiana taxpayers went into the pockets of state government, went into the hallways of the state capitol. That's not right. That's not right. If the feds are going to cut taxes, Louisiana families and businesses deserve to keep that 100%. Right now, in our current system, we're always at the whim of what DC does. And look, let's be honest, if President Biden comes in pretty soon and decides to raise tax rates like they want to do, finds a deal somehow with Speaker Pelosi and President Schumer to raise those tax rates, obviously that's going to be a burden on a weak economy here. But also the double whammy is when you pay more in taxes, yes, you'll be able to deduct more of the state taxes. But when that creates a hole in government here, where do you think they're going to look to fill it? You think they're going to find spending cuts? You think they're going to stop programs that are no longer needed? Or what has history taught us that the Capitol will do every single time in that situation? They'll come back to the taxpayer. And so look, so right now, the current system we have, the taxpayers are caught in the middle of a crossfire. If the feds cut taxes, we don't get the full benefit, state government does. If the feds raise taxes, yeah, feel good on day one, but day two, state government's going to come and replace that with a new tax here. We got to get out of this cycle. We've got to lower our rates, get out of the exemption chess game, and make it very easy with a simple majority vote going forward for us to constantly put downward pressure on that income tax rates. I think that legislative body in the Capitol is getting more pro-taxpayer by the year. I think in the next election cycle, you even see more pro-taxpayer people be sent down there to join the ones that are already there. I think we're about to embark on a new era where you're going to see a race to find a way to create jobs, bring in investment, and lower those rates. And this amendment will help them, give them the tools to do exactly that. So subtly, we're asking folks to vote for Amendment 1 and 2. We think it's the right thing to do. We think it's a strong step in the right direction, and it creates a building block that we can build on in the years to come. And I want to talk about building blocks for a second, because a lot of time in politics today, and look, we fall in this trap sometimes too. People convince themselves, if I can't get a grand slam home run, I don't want to leave the batter's box. I'd rather just stay where I am. I get that. I find myself in those situations as well. But the truth is, over this term we're in the legislature, a different approach has been taken. And part of that is because this is the first term limit wave we've ever seen in that state capitol. These are new people who've gone in with ready to roll their sleeves up and do some cool things, but they're not seasoned pros in the building. They haven't been there for 30 years. I would argue that's a good thing. We need fresh blood. Sure, it's messy and chaotic sometimes, but that's what you need to always bring up new ideas and be willing to put your hand on hot stoves and try new things. So if you look at this term, this is what's been taking place. The first year, there's no doubt that the tort reform that was passed last year is the most important tort reform that's been passed since the Foster administration here. That's because you had new people willing to go in, work across party lines, and embrace a bipartisan bill that drastically improved our legal climate. And we will reap benefits on that for a long time. This year, they came back with the same model. They said, we're going to do tax reform. Would we like to go light years further? You bet. But you know what? These are strong first steps that will make a big difference. So tax reform was passed this year, and an infrastructure bill. We worked with the legislature and many other groups to put $500 million, once fully implemented, into infrastructure each year without raising new taxes. So look, you can nitpick and cherry pick whether this bill should be done that way. Look, I love doing that. Give me a couple beverages. I'll do that any time of the week. But the truth is, if these amendments pass, you can put the last 2-year track record of legal reform, tax reform, infrastructure investment without raising new taxes against any other 2-year period we've seen in a long, long time here. And at some point, if we continue to find these successes that are singles and doubles instead of waiting for the grand slam home run, what happens is the culture in the state capitol starts to change. People right now in the Capitol, they walk around and all they tell you is stories of how things were put in place a million years ago and how you can't touch them. And if someone tried to do that in the 70s and it didn't work, so go away. If all of a sudden the culture starts to change and you can touch hot stoves, you can make changes, winning gets contagious. And I think as the amendments pass, all of a sudden you've got a bunch of people run to the Capitol every year and saying, what can we do next? What demon can we confront now? What hot stove can we touch to fix? And so I think that's what's beginning a culture that's changing there. And so next year, we know there's going to be the next level of this. There's going to be important redistricting decisions to be made. The census numbers that came out, there's been a lot of population movement. I'm in North Louisiana right now. I'm urging my friends in North Louisiana to watch that process like a hawk. You've got two great Congress people up here. They're both fantastic and they serve it well. The numbers are going to be tight. There's going to be some movement there. Make your voice heard, stay involved. I think everything's in good shape, but don't rest on your laurels. You have to pay attention to that. But also we need that redistricting process. We need those lines to be drawn to reflective of what the people's incentives and their desires are. This is a conservative state that's ready to change. This is a reform-minded state that's willing to confront new issues. You've seen it with every election. Those lines need to reflect that. And that will be our voice there as well, not just in the legislature, not just in Congress, but also in the judiciary. We would like to see those judicial lines also redrawn. It's been almost 30 years since that's happened. That's not right. It's time to redraw those lines and make them more reflective of the population movement we've seen. Another thing I think will be big next year is education. There's no doubt when we sent all these kids home over the last year or so to learn from home, we've seen some major learning loss in some of the test scores. That next generation cannot be left behind. And so I think next year there will have to be an Apollo mission type approach to clean that up, to bring in new choice and new educational programs to meet the need of what today's students need. We can't turn a blind eye to that. But if next year those other singles and doubles are added to the ones from these last 2 years, then you go into the year after that, which is an election year. And I like to call that the reboot the boot year. I think there you're going to have plenty of open statewide elected officials. You're going to have a new lines for the legislature to run in. I think if folks are enjoying the last couple of years of some progress, they get optimistic. They get to a point where they believe in Louisiana, that Louisiana can do some things to tackle old problems. I think they will run to the polls and demand to support people who want to do that. And if all of a sudden you wake up 2 years from now and you've got a legislature filled with people who understand the taxpayer and economic growth, working with an administration that understands and believes in the same, I think we'll have the tools ready to run and really make up some ground quickly on that. So yeah, we are in a crazy pandemic world, somewhat excited about the ground that has been traveled for the last year and a half, and even excited about the ground that lays ahead for the next year and a half if things come together quickly. But that all starts with voting for Amendments 1 and 2. I'll quickly tell you this when it comes to LABI. We do a lot of events in Baton Rouge to try to help encourage people to do better in their business and their personal life. So here's someone, if you're in the workers' comp or your company has workers' comp concerns, we have the best annual seminar coming up pretty soon. Please join in if you'd like to, either virtually or in person. You will have the latest and greatest you need to prepare yourself and your company for that. Our Impact Series is giving legal CLEs for lawyers and CPAs all across the state. If you want to understand the up-to-date issues for the business community, our Impact Series is the right one for you. And then our Free Enterprise Awards in November will recognize legislators and businesses that have done great things throughout the state. We'll be passing out trophies and baseball bats galore. And there'll be a band and some fun music there as well. So you might want to come to that and come join us in Baton Rouge for that as well. If you want to stay up to date as things change, during a legislative session, we send out daily updates every single day. We share those with our local chamber partners here. We want you to know what's going on in the legislative session, what bills are passing, what bills are dying, and most importantly, how you can click here to make your voice heard. When your legislators hear from you back home, we hear all the time in the Capitol how much it means to them. And look, y'all sent a good batch to Baton Rouge. One of them is here right now. Representative Thomas Presley does a fantastic job here in person. There may be others watching online that I can't see, but y'all send even both Shreveport and Bossier. Y'all both send good delegations up to work with us. I want to appreciate y'all for doing that. But sign up, text LABI to 66866. We'll update you all throughout the session, all throughout the year, what's important to business. And lastly, I encourage you to be a member of the Shreveport Chamber. I encourage you to be a member of the Bossier Chamber. And yes, as your state chamber, we'd love to be a member of here. But either way you decide to do it, please get involved. The more the business community makes their voice heard, speaks, explains the issues that are holding you back from investing more, from hiring more, to expanding here. Your elected officials need to hear from you. They want to hear from you. They want to do the right thing, but they don't know what path to take unless they hear from you. So join groups locally and at the state level like us. We can be your voice, or reach out to them directly. So with that, I'll kind of stop here. Obviously, we're on social media like everyone else is. And so if you're bored playing on your phone or whatever, and you want to kind of hang out with us, this is where you can find us. And we'll put a lot of important information throughout the year on that as well. So with that, Tim, if you're cool with this, I'll be glad to take any questions either in the room, or I guess if there's a virtual opportunity, to do that as well.
Yeah, if folks online want to mute themselves, they can ask a question. If folks here.
Yeah.
Right, it's not a question, but I'll make a comment. I think right now we've got the best legislature we've had in a long time, but I think the best is yet to come because of the upcoming election. So from that standpoint, our government, the future of life for Louisiana. And I think LABI had a big part in getting the legislature we have, guiding and educating them. So I love the programs you have. I think they're phenomenal. And then the last point, the amendments, those are great amendments. Our problem, our duties are to get people to understand it. Just because it has the word tax in it,
Sure.
Don't vote against it. And that's the big problem. We've got to educate the public. These are good.
So several good points there. I'll start with the last one. Look, there's no doubt the word TAX is a 4-letter word to many people. It is to me too. Okay. When I'm like every other person, when you hear a constitutional amendment, you walk into the gymnasium or whatever on voting day and you start reading those posters on the wall. And if you can't clearly get it in the first sentence, your defense mechanism kicks in and you say, no, I get it. I'm the same person. That's why we want to come out and explain this. These amendments are absolutely not going to raise your taxes. And they're also absolutely critical for us to taking that next step on centralizing the sales tax collection, making it easy for small business, but also beginning the pathway to get us away from our dependency on what Washington, D.C. does on any given day, because we've seen where they're going. And instead put us in a process to where we can drive those rates down and control our own destiny of hopefully one day getting out of the income tax game altogether. That's one thing. The last thing, you complimented the legislative delegation that we have right now. I would agree. And look, term limits have brought this on. This is really the first implementation of term limits. And in Baton Rouge, a lot of times what we hear is whining and complaining about, the local paper and all about how the legislature, it's chaotic and they're always fighting and there's fussing and pointing fingers. And look, that is true. There's some of that going on. But I always try to remind people, why is that happening? Well, if you go back 30 or 40 years, legislature was pretty efficient because every day the same 5 people would walk into a dark room and make all the decisions. And they'd come out and say, this is what we're doing. And everyone else would say, you got it. And that's how it works. Now that's efficiency, but I would argue that hasn't helped us a whole lot as a state. And so I'd rather put my chances with constantly bringing in new energy, new ideas, new blood, people who are not career politicians, but instead career people from the real world who want to come and lend their expertise. I'll take my chances on that any day of the week. And so I'm excited about what we have down there. And I'm excited to work with these guys. And yes, we have put together boot camps and other things at LABI to try to encourage business people to run for office. And we started that a couple of years ago because we would go talk to business leaders and you'd have this fantastic conversation. And these people would know everything about their community and everything about how it works and everything about how an economy could grow. And you would say, man, you should run for office. And they're like, oh, I'm not a lawyer, I can't run. And we'd have to remind folks like, look, we're good on lawyers. We need business people. Okay. And we need people to know what it takes to run, personnel, deal with customer demand, know what it feels to go to bed every night with that loan and that shrinking margin hanging over your head and decisions you have to make it work. You need that type of ingenuity in the legislature, and we're starting to see it. And so we put boot camps together, and we continuously feed off the energy of these folks coming down here to do that. Thank you, Ray. Any other questions? Virtually or in person? Yes, sir.
So as we're part of this is the choir, right? And so we want to go out and sing off the same song sheet. Are there, as we talk to colleagues and friends, what are the really 1 or 2 nuggets? Because there's a lot of depth here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in the weeds. And when you highlighted, disconnection from Washington, you highlighted on the tax budget, you highlighted the streamlining. Are those, as we try and communicate to folks, are those the nuggets that you think are going to resonate most with small businesses or with folks in the business community?
Yeah, so there's a website that we and many of our other partners that support these amendments have put together. It's called untanglemytaxes.org. Untanglemytaxes.org. And so that website will have a lot of materials on it, yard signs, one pagers, things like that. Also, we're going to try to put the message out there on social media and other ways just to kind of make sure that folks understand it, because these are complicated issues. Tax codes, complicated issues. But I'll tell you, the way I kind of understand it is on Amendment 1, it's time for Louisiana to give small businesses in Louisiana the same break in paying their taxes that we give out-of-state businesses. It's not right. And just if you're not sure, go talk to any small business that has customers in multiple parishes, multiple jurisdictions. Go talk to any of them and ask them if this is a big deal. And they'll tell you it's critical. And so, everyone loves to walk around and say how much they love small business. And, on Small Business Saturday every year, they take their selfie in front of the door. But if you can't show up and help them reduce some of this red tape for them, do you really love small business? And I, for one, don't want to live in a community that can't sustain small business. I think they're the backbone of everything that's good. They're the first ones to step up to support the ball team, the local school, and the local charities. And you can't leave those folks behind. And so, number one, if you want to support small business, you want to give them the same rights that we give out-of-state companies that we never see around here, you need to get to support Amendment 1. And on Amendment number 2, I would say if that thing passes, that income tax rate goes from 6% to 4.25 immediately. That's a pretty good deal. And I really like the fact that now we can go with this new term limited legislature and work on ways to grow the economy and bring those rates down even more with a simple majority vote. Right now, if you find those opportunities, you got to go play in the 2/3 vote world because of this constitutional language. And so the last thing on that amendment I like is it puts a new ceiling at 4.75. So income tax rates will never go above 4.75 again if this passes. So even if you're unsure and you don't like the word tax, you can understand that right now we're at 6. And if this passes, you'll never go above 4.75 again. I kind of like that opportunity. Now, it's always easy to vote no on constitutional amendment. That's always the path of least resistance. But if you do that, if you vote no on these just because that's the easy thing to do, you leave small business in the lurch. You give them one more headwind to face coming out of the pandemic economy. And what you tell states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, we're not serious about trying to cut income taxes. We're not serious at all. We'd rather just kind of stay in our safe little whoopee cave. And I don't think we can compete like that if we truly want to invest, get some of those jobs coming from the East and West Coast. I'm ready to go play ball, get those jobs, get companies to come here. I think our companies are begging for it. I think our communities are begging for it. And the only way you do that is you get more competitive with the spreadsheets. And right now we're not in the game.
These pass, so they take effect in 2022.
So if Amendment 1 passes, that new collector will have to be organized. They'll have to put the rules in place, and there'll have to be a statute passed next year. And so if Amendment 1 passes, it'll still require some legwork from the new task force that's created, and we'll go back to the legislature and put some guardrails on what they can do. And so the Amendment 1 begins the process of that. It'll take a year or two for that to go into effect. On the income tax side, yeah, I think it goes into effect immediately. I have to go back and double check that, but yeah, I think so.
Just one more comment.
Please.
These are critically important right now because of industry looking at Louisiana. Carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, that's going to be the economic driver for Louisiana for at least the next 20 years. And they can reduce their carbon footprint in Louisiana, but they can also do it in Texas. So this is critical for us drawing that industry, and it will be the economic driver for Louisiana. So this is absolutely critical. Timing is critical.
I think it's a huge piece on the economic development front. I think you're right, Ray. I think it'll absolutely give us another arrow in the quiver to go out and hunt for some of these. There's no doubt about it. Look, it's a process. And look, I don't want to give a false impression that this is mission accomplished moment. We're not going to put on the flight suit and go in the carrier and have that speech. We're not doing that right now, okay? What we are saying is winning is contagious. And if you pass this and you tell that term limited legislature, okay, when you pass bold bills, we'll go to the ballot and support it. We'll be right there with them next year saying, that felt good, guys, let's do some more. And all of a sudden you start whittling away that Constitution. And let's remember what the Constitution is, okay? There are different forms of Constitution in America. There's the one that our founding fathers drafted, And we've all seen the stories, and we've all seen the paintings and all the wigs and all that stuff. There's that one. And then there's the one Louisiana has that was originally drafted in the 20s by Huey Long, and then was refined in the 70s by Edwin Edwards. And then over the years has been amended 8 zillion times for every little issue that comes up. So what we have right now is a Huey document fortified by Edwin, amended 1 million times. So let's not pretend this is the quill that we're bringing out here. This is a document that needs to be touched up. I would love to say at one point we have a constitutional convention, we can redo the whole thing, and maybe one day we'll get there. But until then, we got to chip away everywhere we can to compete with other states, and making it easier for small businesses to survive and how they pay their taxes, and making it easier for people to pay lower income taxes today, and make it easier by easier vote for the legislature to continually drive those down. I think that's a step in the right direction for a document that needs a lot of work.
Serious is the opposition, you think, for those that be against the sales tax? What's going on?
On the opposition side, there hasn't been a whole lot that has been organized. In the legislative session, these were bipartisan votes. I mean, these were hard fought bipartisan votes. Don't make it sound simple, but there was a lot of discussion going on. So you had Republicans and Democrats voting for many of these, which was the right approach. Right now, the only really organized opposition is there's one left-leaning budget group that receives funding from George Soros that has come out and said that they don't like Amendment number 2. And so it wouldn't surprise me if the big spending crowd at some point comes out and goes after Amendment number 2. But thus far, it has not been an organized effort, but we'll have to wait and see.
And what's their objection? Have they articulated what it is that they don't like?
They wanted more of the tax cuts to go to the lower percentages. So right now I mentioned on the personal income tax side, you have 2, 4, 6. Each of those rates was reduced in this bill. They didn't like that approach. They wanted basically the 4 and 6 to stay the same and just use all the savings to eliminate the 2 or put it more towards the bottom tiers. Again, there was a debate that was had. There was this, so instead of doing all or nothing, what the legislature tried to do is chop away at a little bit of each of them and try to use where the FIT is used to make sure that whoever's using it today gets the benefit of the rate cut tomorrow. So they use legislative analysis, and the economists that the legislature has to figure out how to place that. They had the balanced approach. I think it's disappointing that left-leaning budget group came out, but a lot of these groups, they got to raise money somehow, and if you're complaining, it's easier for them to do it. So I think it's part of that.
Share your presentation.
Please, yeah, be great. Well, last thing I say is, if you're a business person on the phone, on the Zoom watching, or all of you here, I want to say thank you. This has been a tough year and a half to exist as a business, as a family. Everyone's got a little bit of a funk that we're all carrying around with us because it's tough. The world changes every couple of days. I get it. But there is some optimism to see in Louisiana. I think those amendments are a big part of it. And again, I want to go back to it. Winning is contagious. The more we continue to put wins on the board, the more I think we can all get out of this haze we're in and start realizing, look, we can't just wait for DC to fix all our problems. We can't wait for the world to get, more sane. We got to take control of our own destiny. And if we start passing better bills and confronting some of our historical problems and taking some bold decisions, it'll matter less and less what other people do at some point if we do that. So just thank you for what you've done, and also thank you for continuing to back up this legislature and help them be bold. So appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks to everyone who joined us online. And Stephen's here. We'll share the PowerPoint out, and we'll be putting some information out on the web as well. So have a great day.